Hi, everyone. Just waiting on everybody to come in.
Mhm.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here to celebrate the virtual event for this anthology, You've Got a Place Here Too. I'm really, really excited to dive into conversation with these beautiful people on your screen who are all contributors and amazing writers. Um, Before we get into that, I want to give you a little, little backstory of like how the anthology came to be and all of that. Um, the reason why the reason why You've Got a Place Here Too became what it is right now is because I've wanted to write a Howard story for a long time because I went to Howard, HU. I see some people in the chat saying HU, you know. And I felt like when we talk about settings to showcase Black love, because I am a writer that writes romance, HBCUs are really the perfect setting, right? It's just such a beautiful collection and body of Black faces. There's so much like vibrant life on campus. There's so much of finding yourself on campus. And so I felt like while you're finding yourself, you can find yourself in these like, whimsical romances as well. And also because there are over 100 HBCUs across the country, including the Virgin Islands, which we have one of the contributors who wrote about that. And you don't really necessarily know about that unless you're like really doing the research to find that out. And so I wanted a story, or I wanted a collection of stories where someone's picking up this book just reading about romance, but they're learning so much about the different HBCUs across the country. They're learning so much about the history that are through these HBCUs. You'll hear me ask a few contributors about some of the historical elements that they put in their story. But even when we talk about Farah Rashan, who's a contributor who wasn't able to be on the call, she talks about the Mardi Gras experience with the Mardi Gras Indians. Carla Bruce writes about Howard forming their first Lambda Alliance student chapter on campus. And so these are also things that I wanted to make sure were incorporated within the story so that, while you're getting this romance, you're getting a little historical tea as well. And all of the writers featured in this collection and on the Zoom call, they write about Black love and all its beauty and glory. And I really knew that they would bring just the amount of heat that I needed in this collection. And as for me, one of the things that I'm always trying to do as a YA, a young adult writer, is to like sort of instill lessons just on the low. And so for readers who are seriously considering like figuring out what they're trying to do post graduation, I wanted them to consider an HBCU. And although they're not perfect, I definitely feel like for Black students, it's a place where they can really be seen and valued when historically we're not always. Um, so yes, this is how this anthology came to be. I also want to acknowledge the, targeted threats to HBCUs and how this is by design. This week is also Banned Book Week. And I think that we can all understand what the targeted attacks on Black folks have always been historically in marginalized communities and education. What this all symbolizes is an attempt to strip us of education, of resources, of ways to thrive and, elevate ourselves. And I think it was very surreal being on tour and actually having this happen the week that I was on tour with some of the contributors. And it really was a difficult point in like for the last event that we did, which was at Kindred Stories in Houston. I felt like it was a event that was less about romance and more just about Black love, which was beautiful in its own right. And so I really wanted to acknowledge it because it is just a reminder that we cannot afford for our stories to be erased. Even when we talk about, like, even online, there was something about, like, a few months ago about enslavement and how people were trying to say that wasn't a real thing, which is like, wild to me, but also it really shows that we have to really be careful and we have to be really diligent in making sure that these stories are being told or they will be told for us. So I wanted to start off with that. The last thing that I wanted to say very quickly before we get into everything is HBCUs are being underfunded. They've all historically been, but very much now with schools, federal funding being pulled. And so I'd been trying to look up like, different organizations and that kind of changes with the tides, who feels good versus who doesn't. And so what I'm encouraging everybody on this call to do is to donate to look to see where your local HBCU is and donate to the HBCU. One of the things that Howard did a few years ago, they had the 1867 donation project, which was that's when it was founded in 1867, and they were asking alum to donate $18.67. And I thought that that was a brilliant way of being like, if you don't have the money, how can you invest in, our Black kids' education? It's a really great way to do that. So that is what I encourage you all to do. So now that that is out the way, I would love to go into great detail and read every single bio of the contributors, but that would take forever. So instead, I am going to have them individually do a brief introduction. So I'll call on you guys, 'cause I know it gets weird, like who's supposed to go first. So I want you to introduce yourself, the last book or few books you've had out, the title of your story, and a brief description of what the story is about. Um, I always hate having to figure out who's going to be first, but I'm going to go in order alphabetically. I was going to get that reaction. Hi, Elizabeth. Would you like to go first, please? I promise you won't go first with the questions, but I'm going to start you off this way here.
Um, can you hear me okay? My mic just, okay, perfect. Good evening. I'm so hyped to be here with you all. This is my first event in what feels like a very long time, and I couldn't imagine
Oh, thank you for
a
coming.
more beautiful group to gather with. So I'm so excited. Um, I most recently published Family Lore, intergenerational story that came out in 2023. And before that, Clap When You Land, YA novel that came out in 2020. And my story in this anthology is called Flying Lessons. And it's the story of Angelo, who lives in New York with his mom and has always dreamed of being a pilot, and learns about a Tuskegee Airman who was also from the Dominican Republic, an Afro-Latino, and considers following his footsteps. And from that decision, meets this woman he's obsessed with, and has to make some really tough choices around his family and his future, and also this woman that he grows to love. It's written in verse, and Ebony was an amazing editor who let me take some incredible risks with this story. So that's Flying Lessons. Did I
Thank
do it all? I
you.
feel like I gotta write
You
stuff
did.
down. I'm like, I got my
No,
name in there. Who
it was
knows?
great. You, girl, stop it. It was perfect. Thank you, Elizabeth. We appreciate it. Okay. Next up, we have Jasmine Bell.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine. This was my first published work, so that's really exciting.
Whoop, whoop.
So my story was called Sunset Sips, and it is about two students named Malcolm and Piper who have always had crushes on each other, but they've never acted on it because Piper really is trying to be focused on her academics. But when her friend kind of pushes her to go on a date with a different guy at the cafe that Malcolm works at, things start to like heat up between Malcolm and Piper. And so it's just a cute little cafe romance story that I'm really proud of. And I think that was all you asked for us to say.
Also, where'd you go to school?
Oh, I went to North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie Pride.
I saw it all in the
Um,
comments, so it reminded me to ask you
yeah, so I
that.
had to wear this tonight because I said I had to wear
I
my blue
see
and
you. I
gold. But
see
yes,
you. I
Aggie Pride,
see
y'all.
you. All right. Next up, Aaron Foley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Foley. Prior to You've Got a Place Here Too, I published a novel in 2022 called Boys Come First. It is a novel about three Black gay best friends trying to navigate their love, life, relationships, work lives, all of that in Detroit, where I'm from and where I'm currently at right now.
Mhm.
And my contribution to You've Got a Place Here Too is called Who Teaches Black Boys How to Love? And it takes place in the 1980s at Lewis College of Business, which is the only HBCU. It's no longer open. It closed some years ago. But it was Michigan's only HBCU and one of a few in the Midwest. And so my story kind of illuminates that a little bit. I know we know HBCUs are often in the South, and there's a rich, tradition with all of that. But I had the task of sort of bringing some attention to the Midwest, and so my characters Wilbur and Desmond meet at this HBCU. Like a lot of gay relationships, one is kind of ready to kind of be loved out loud, and the other one is kind of not sure if he if how how out loud he wants to live his love. And so I sort of take our two characters through that. I did not go to an HBCU. I went to a PWI. I went to Michigan State, but I have a lot of love for folks that did go to HBCUs. I had an uncle that went to Fisk. I've had folks that went to Howard and Morehouse and all those places. And so, but writing about Michigan's HBCU was something that I had the great honor and privilege of doing, thanks to Ebony. So thank you, Ebony.
Of course. Also, someone in the comments said, "What up, though?"
Oh, what up, though? Yeah. I'm on the
Okay.
west side of Detroit, by the way. So don't know.
Sorry. Oh, goodness. Always. Okay. Next up is Christine.
First, I just want to say I'm so glad I'm not the only one who went to a PWI on this room. I think like most Black students that go to PWIs, a lot of us have friends at HBCUs, and so we kind of get the HBCU experience by
A
visiting
lot of
with our
visiting
friends.
homecomings, too.
Oh, it's a lot of visits. It's a lot of visits, y'all. And so much like Aaron, I have so much love for HBCUs. My name is Christine Platt. Before this anthology, I wrote The Afro-Minimalist Guide to Living with Less, Rebecca Not Becky. I don't know, y'all. I was doing a lot of writing, a lot of kids' books and stuff. I have a book coming out tomorrow, which I'm really excited about, called Less is Liberation. And I had the honor of writing One Little Lie, and it is about Langston University, which is in Oklahoma. Such a rich, rich history of just Black solidarity, life. I think we hear so much about, the South, but there were actually more Black settlement towns in Oklahoma than any other state in the United States. And so there's a rich history there. We tend to only hear about Tulsa, but there's a really beautiful history there. And so I wanted to kind of weave that into Langston University, and my characters, Leo and Layla, fall in love. But Leo has a little secret. And I think a lot of people, that freshman year, it's this opportunity where you get to maybe reinvent yourself instead of being your authentic self. And you think that that's the right thing to do. And so that one little lie ends up spiraling. And so that is their love story. I don't want to give too much away.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Kennedy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kennedy. My story is Brave the Skies, and it takes place actually on a fictional HBCU that lives only in the Kennedyverse. I had written an Audible original called Coming Home, and that was the first time I introduced Findlay. And Ebony was like, "What do you think about for this anthology? Setting another story on that campus." And Ebony, you've inspired me. So my next book actually takes place on Findlay. So I'm
love
really working with that. I'm really
it.
working it. But my story is Brave the Skies. I write contemporary romance, adult. My story is Brave the Skies. It's a little taboo, just a little bit, or it hints at taboo, but it doesn't go all the way taboo. It is the daughter of the hero in the Audible original Coming Home. His daughter is a journalism major at Findlay, and she ends up in the class of this, her professor in the middle of the semester has to take an emergency leave. And this fine professor comes in, he's very young. So there's not much of an age gap. She's about to graduate. He's he's very young, and she kind of has a crush on him. And I won't say everything, but nothing happens inappropriate when he is a professor. But a few years down the road, they kind of have their second chance. And so that's kind of the gist of the story. And I also went to a PWI. I went to UNC Chapel Hill. They have a great journalism program, and my father has still not forgiven me. I grew up in HBCU spaces. My father was in higher education administration. He was dean of students, president of 3 HBCUs. So he's like, and you're what? So my husband, if anybody is a Ram, went to Winston-Salem State. So I am surrounded and actually do realize what I missed out on. So this is kind of my vicarious experience. So thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you for being a part of it. And last but certainly not least, we have Nicola.
Hi. Hi, it's so nice to be here. So nice to be with everyone. Um, let's see. So I am Nicola Yoon. I primarily have written books for young adults, romances for young adults. I wrote Everything, Everything, and The Sun is Also a Star, and Instructions for Dancing. I'm on deadline right now for my next young adult book, so I'm a little crazy. It's like due in like 24 days. So wish me luck. And I published my first book for adults. I want to say it was last year or the year before, but I cannot remember. It's one of a kind. Um, my story is called Romantic Studies. It's set in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which I did not know had an HBCU until Ebony told me. Honestly, if I had known, I would have gone there because it's like right by the water, like the Caribbean. It's like beautiful. Like I just really, I looked at every picture and watched every video. It's like this place is magical. Um, my story is told in like a non-traditional format, so it's told as a course catalog. So like the first one is um, it tells you the degree requirements and a course title, and it sort of just goes into the description of what's happening with these two. It's Danica and Sterling. Danica has a secret that she's not sharing with Sterling, and she thinks that they can just have a fling, but you know, flings turn into real feelings after a while, and they have to work it out. That's
Thank you so much. All right, so now you got a taste of what the stories are if you guys haven't read them. So we're gonna jump right into the conversations because we also want to make sure we have enough time for audience Q&A. Thank you all for submitting questions that you had in advance. And also, if there are people who did not submit, it's okay. You didn't fill the assignment. You can also put your questions in the Q&A and I'll just kind of swap going between both so we can make sure we answer as many as possible. So first, we're going to start with Jasmine. So Jasmine, obviously, you know what she wrote about because of where she went to school. But she was actually our contest winner for the anthology. So we are so pleased to have had her. Thank you so much for submitting, Jasmine. So I want you, because you have a very cute meet cute about, it's like a writer meet cute about how this story came to be. Obviously you guys know each other, but you know what I mean? Like the actual story is the meet cute. Tell us about how you applied for the contest and how a certain someone slid into your DMs about this too.
So I just honestly, I feel like this has all been like something that I manifested because me and my friend were literally on the phone the night before Kennedy slid into my DMs talking about the anthology. The next day, I'm scrolling on Twitter and I get the notification from Kennedy and I'm like, oh my God, what did she DM me about? And I look and she was telling me about the contest and I was like, oh my God, I have to apply. So I was like, I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do because it is such a big opportunity. And so I said, wow, like it meant a lot because I had been like talking to Kennedy throughout like a couple years of just like about me wanting to get into writer spaces, and she has an excellent memory, by the way. So like she every time I would come meet her, she would ask me about school. She knew I went to A&T. So when like she reached out to me about it, I said, oh my God, like yes, let me go ahead and apply because I want to be in this and look at me now. So it was just such an amazing opportunity. And when she said it, I said, okay, let me grab this by the reins and go with it. So yeah.
I love that. Also, I need to take more fish oil so I can remember stuff like that because that's great. I love this. And also I love it because it, like you said, it kind of pushed you in a way you might not have tried to or didn't know about before. So that's great. So you get the DM, you're like, okay, I'm gonna apply. So give us a sense of like how did the coffee story, the cafe story come to be? Because it is kind of a trope, I guess. And I'm just curious about like as you were starting to write the process, like write the story, like how did this come to be? How did you immediately go into I'm going to do a cafe story, and why did you choose to make it a fictional place on campus?
So I've always wanted to write like a short like cafe story. I think they're so cute. Like I kind of do like I can cook really well. So like food and like my writing is something I always like to pair together. And when I was like, oh my God, like I have the opportunity to do this, I just kind of went with it. I also worked in our dining services at A&T. I was a marketing intern. So like I was at like every single cafe, or not really all our little restaurants and everything. And we do have a cafe. It's just in the engineering building. And I don't think I've ever gone in that building. And for being completely honest with you, I don't go over to that side of campus. But it's also a very small cafe. So I was like, okay, I know exactly where I want it to be set because we have a bistro that like looks out into like our kind of our yard. And then and you can see the clock tower from there. So I said, oh, I know, I'm just going to replace it with where our bistro is and kind of make it a little bit more of a fictional place just to go with that. But I think that I always try to find ways to connect food to writing because it's just two of my biggest passions. And I just thought it was like really cute and nice to kind of like, it's just a nice setting.
I love that. Wait a minute. You were on Top Chef Junior and Master Chef Junior? Can we talk
Yes.
about that? That is amazing.
Oh my God, you didn't know that?
No, Jazz.
I I feel like I always like drop like little bits of
Shout out to
lore.
the moms because they be, they gonna say the things that you're not gonna say. Well, yes, that makes sense. I
Um,
love this.
yeah, so when I was younger, I was on Master Chef Junior when I was like 12 and then or like 11, and then I was on Top Chef Junior when I was 13, and I didn't get far on Master Chef Junior, but on Top Chef Junior, I made it to the final five and it was on with like 10 episodes, won some challenges. It was an amazing experience.
So I'm gonna have to watch this season. We'll talk
Oh,
about this offline.
that's so intense. I was a child, but it was very fun. I still have a lot of my cooking skills, and something that I actually like want to start kind of getting back into. But yeah, before knew I wanted to go to a HBCU. At first, I thought I was going to culinary school, but yeah.
Mm, I love this. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you guys, there's some real experience, some real behind the scenes experience for this story. So you got to check it out. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to Erin. So Erin, you talked a little bit about this, but you had an interesting experience writing about Michigan's only HBCU, which that was like one of the most incredible things I found out when I was researching HBCUs, and I was like, obviously being from Michigan, this has to be an anthology, and I know exactly who can write this story, and Michigan is in its own way sometimes a HBCU. So it was perfect, and also because I there's no one that really went to the school that I know of, so it would be great to have somebody from Detroit actually tell this experience. But it was different from a lot of the other schools featured. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so and I saw somebody say "Go Green" in the white in the chat, and I will not be responding what we Michigan State people respond to "Go Green" with in this kind of setting because it feels kind of weird. But if you know, you know. But no, with Lewis College of Business, Detroit's only HBCU. It is since reformatted into a school that does like shoe design and stuff like that, and that was only recent. But for the years that it was open in its like original format, there were exactly 3 buildings on campus. There was no athletic program, there was no musical program, there was no dormitory, and it only offered 2-year degrees in business, like like computing and business sciences and things like that. So when you put like Lewis College of Business next to like a FAMU or Howard and stuff like that, I was like, um, like, what am I gonna like? I wanted to do something around music, and it's like, well, they ain't got no music program. And it's like, well, where are they gonna meet? It's like it's a commuter college. So trying to bring that to life was definitely a challenge. But what in my research at Lewis College of Business, one, it was founded by a Black woman, and so Not a lot of the HBCUs period were founded by women, so there was a little bit of history in that. And two, a lot of people, Michigan has a lot of Black cities. Detroit is one of the blackest, if not the blackest city in the country per capita. But we also have a lot of cities like Kalamazoo and Flint and Saginaw with a lot of high Black population. So we have a lot of Black culture here, but we may not always have like the staples of that, like, again, are kind of associated with the South. So bringing that to light was kind of interesting with Lewis College of Business specifically. A lot of people were turning to because we have this long history of manufacturing and stuff like that. So a lot of people were trying to get off the assembly line and get into more of those white collar jobs and stuff like that in a place like Lewis College of Business, where you could like go to classes among your own and everybody had the same purpose and goal. Was like, a route for a lot of people to kind of climb the economic ladder. And so I tried to bring some of that into the story as well. Putting it in the 1980s was a choice because Detroit in the 1980s was not a pretty place. Like the economy was not great because the automotive industry was in turmoil. Then again, when isn't it? But I wanted to kind of put it in a time period where a lot of people will be flocking to a place like Lewis College of Business to kind of, find a way out of their situation, which is what HBCUs have always done, right? Historically, it's like, just as much as it is a place for education and to find yourself and stuff like that, for a lot of folks, it is a way like out of a certain kind of situation. So
the thing that I also want to talk about is the title, because you kind of talked about why it was set in the 80s, but to go back to the title, because when I read Boys Come First, I was just like, I was so excited to read a story about like three Black gay men in Detroit and, in a predominantly Black city where, being gay, especially at a certain time in, history, and even in today's time, it's there's a lot of homophobia, right? And so it was great to be able to have this representation. And it's just like, listen, this is the story. This is a story that you need to read. This is an experience, and that's what it is, right? Putting it out there. And I knew I wanted that same representation in the anthology because I feel like it's the same with HBCUs. We talk about the liberation of Black folks, but it does not, it includes, it's like hetero Black folks, it doesn't necessarily include the full scope of like Blackness. And so can you talk about the title for the story and how did you come up with that as you were writing it? Because it's such a beautiful title, and even the line within the book where it talks about that title coming out is just so incredible.
yeah, so the title "Who Teaches Black Boys How to Love?" It's like a question that kind of like rattled around in my head for a little bit, but then when I decided to apply it to the story, I was just kind of asking that question, within the story, but just asking in general, like who does teach, a young Black gay boy how to love, whether whether they're queer or whether they're not. Within the story, whether it was Boys Come First or the characters in this particular story. A lot of us are raised by, if not both our parents, and definitely a single mom. And we're kind of raised with the expectation of being, operating in a very heteronormative world. We either look to what's in front of us in terms of relationships. And if it is like our mother and our father together, then that's how we apply like what we think love should be, what we think love should look like, whether we know we're queer or not. And then once we find out that we're queer, it's just like, okay, we're going to use this idea of what marriage and love and relationships are based on what we see with our parents or like all of the heterosexual relationships around us. But then, like sometimes as we get older and pursue these relationships on our own, it doesn't always work. And so when you kind of ask that question, like who teaches us how to love, it's like, we kind of have this idea of what it is, and not to say it's like wrong, right or wrong, but, we find out as we get older, like some of the rules that apply to like, a more heteronormative relationship, or even to seeing how like, if we grow up with a single parent, like how our single parents navigate through their relationships as they're dating, as they're trying to find their own version of what love is and whatnot. The rules don't, we find out as we get older, the rules don't always apply. when we go out there as adults, when we go out there and try to find our own like solid ground and whatnot. And so we're kind of left with these questions. It's like, well, if this doesn't work, then what are our examples? What do we look for? And so, a lot of gay boys, like, either we find community within ourselves and we have that, or we're just kind of on this endless path sometimes of trying to figure out exactly what it is that we need to kind of model ourselves or blueprint ourselves after. And so that's what the characters in this particular story go through. That's what the characters in a lot of the stuff I write go through, because there's no like blueprint or handbook really. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Next, Elizabeth. So me and Elizabeth's story is funny because we were actually breaking bread, and I was trying to figure out how I wanted to pitch this to you. And then I had to go for it. And then you brought up Tuskegee Airmen, which is hilarious because you know how like in black families there's always that thing that everybody has. For my father, it's like you not in this family if you don't watch Tuskegee Airmen. So when you told me that had told when you told me about this important figure that I want you to kind of talk more about, I was like, oh, this is great. I love this. This absolutely has to happen. And then we kind of started brainstorming from there, like the school and how it could work out. So can you talk a little bit about this important figure and how it sort of shaped this story and how you shaped him into this story?
Yes, I knew when you had mentioned that I wanted to set the story at Tuskegee because of Esteban Jotes, who was an Afro-Dominican. He came to the United States when he was 4 years old, and wound up being a Tuskegee Airman who did not actually fight abroad. In fact, he was a second lieutenant here, and the majority of what he is known for was how he participated in civil rights. And so even as someone who was a part of the military, was often reprimanded, often in trouble because of his dedication to trying to integrate the Air Force, right? And what I learned about Tuskegee through kind of using him as a lens was just the many ways that the university attempted to be really expansive in its dedication to Pan-Africanism and to folks of African descent throughout the Caribbean as well, that I think we think of historically Black colleges and universities as primarily being for Black Americans, and that is completely true, right? But that there was a generosity with which a lot of the presidents and people who carried on that torch welcomed people from all over, right? And Booker T. Washington was really thoughtful about wanting to have Afro-Caribbeans, about extending his hand to particularly Afro-Cubans to come be on campus and come be a part of it. And so it made so much sense to me that someone like Esteban Jotes, who was in the very, very early waves of Dominicans coming to this country. We didn't really arrive here in mass until like the 80s. So this is someone who, we're talking about the 40s. Probably one of like 5 Dominicans in the country. I'm being facetious, but like there were probably very few. And it was very black and white, right? The idea of ethnicity, of Afro-Latinidad was, I think, very limited language. And he found his home there. And he didn't attend the university, but he did attend the training. And it's, I think, a point of pride to look back at this figure and just realize the ways in which he carved a place for himself and then was really thoughtful about what integration or what that battle looked like, not just like taking, but also how am I also working with what I've been taught and with who I am, and being mindful of my place in this country and how I can better this country. And so I think I had to weave around how my main character was going to hold on to him. And he's kind of like a little guardian angel, like he Angelo kind of hears him sometimes, or like sees he has a picture of him up and he'll be like, he's nodding. So he's like guiding him towards love. Hotez, was married, had 4 children, had children. He was very beloved. He died very, very young in a crash during like a training. And so I think that he had a beautiful love story with his wife. And I think he's someone who would have kind of guided Angelo along towards melody and like, yeah, find your girl, right? I found my girl, find your girl, and like enjoy your time with your girl, because we don't know how much time we have. And so I loved him as this kind of guardian figure that Angelo always thought he could see winking at him or nodding at him or like, could hear him whispering to him.
I love that so much. I didn't know all that, so that's beautiful. Okay, so we have to talk about the sort of the we're gonna talk about a couple of things. One, I wanted you to talk about your decision to write in verse. I remember when I pitched this to you, and I pitched it to everybody, like you guys can try different formats. I was like really like, yeah, Liz, you could do this, or you could do in verse, or you could do in verse, or like it was like trying not to push her, but also being like, I really want you to do this in verse, but I also don't want to force you to do anything. So I want you to talk about what was the process of, or what is the process generally like for you writing a verse? And also, your decision to have both of them be in the aviation program. Because I think that was just such a cute part of like how they were able to relate to one another in the story and like how they were able to flirt with each other in the story too.
Yeah, I whenever I participate in an anthology, I love to see it as an opportunity to offer something different than I would in a long form and to experiment, to learn something, right? The short form is really like it's a pressure cooker in its own way. It adds this compression. And so when I'm thinking of 5,000 words, for me, it's like, well, verse allows brevity. And I can kind of make this dreamlike. And for this character who isn't sure what his schooling is going to look like because there are responsibilities he has at home. It is a dream to go to this school, even for if I go for a week, if I go for a semester, I don't know what life is going to look like. It is a dream come true. I love that idea of like him finding this girl who's like his first real love, his first many experiences are with her, and it's like, I've always imagined what this could be like, but I didn't know. And so the all the first step that Angelo participates in, for me, verse allowed me to move quickly through time. It allowed me to give almost sketchings of the campus, of the setting, of the ways in which Angelo is like, oh, this kind of feels like the Caribbean, and this is kind of like the accent, like making comparisons. Like it could be very quickly without my having to become too entrenched in, well, I didn't go to Tuskegee. I don't know all of the ins and outs, like how much history to put in here. It let me just boil it down to the essentials. And I think for a short story that felt really reflective of what I wanted to happen, and really thoughtful. And I've always thought like the idea of like a TA and like their student, especially if they're close in age, not like if you're a grad student with a freshman, like we all know that's not it. But like someone who's a junior and you're a first year, and we often see it in the direction of like, an older guy and a younger woman. But I love this perspective of like, what if she's the one who's kind of like, um, you know, his teacher, or his helping his teacher and schooling him a little bit, but also they're close enough in age that it doesn't feel inappropriate. But that allows him the innocence of being a young man who doesn't have the same experience as her, but is um kind of brought in with open arms to a relationship, right? Like is open to being someone who doesn't have toxicity, who isn't trying to dominate, who isn't trying to be more powerful than her, and is in fact like, yo, she's bad, she's so smart, like she's great. Like, yes, I will learn. Like I'm here to try to be really open towards what this could be. And so I really like the idea of like the ways in which this slight age gap, but also just the way that they are able to use the language of aviation, of this dream they have, to find their ways towards each other. And it made for like fun study sessions, like you get to allow for a lot of tutoring that ended up being joyous.
Absolutely. And also like even when you're saying the dream, like say like being in the sky, being with the clouds,
Yes.
that feels like one big dream. So
Yeah,
thank
exactly.
you for that. Okay, next up is Kennedy, because I want to make sure we can get to questions too. So you've already talked about what, the school is. I like to call the story our A Different World. So I want you to talk about Dr. Lowe and Celine, and what made you go in the direct? I'm very curious about what made you go in the direction of the story. And just to like add on to the question is like, what was the care that you took in making sure that you wrote this story in a way that feels, that feels like it has care and thinking about what you're trying to say here.
Yeah, a lot of my stories, like I said, I write contemporary adult romance, and a lot of my stories are very heavy. I mean, they always end joyously, of course, because you have to have a happily ever after for romance, but they tend to be very emotional. And I wanted to have fun, in this shorter space. I really wanted to have fun. And I'd always been kind of curious about Celine from the Audible original I'd written. And so I started just playing with tropes, which I don't
Hmm.
usually do very much when I'm writing. I mean, a trope, I have to like tease it out, like, where is the trope? But I
Hmm.
kind of started with student teacher. And similar to what Elizabeth was saying, I was like, I don't want it to be inappropriate. And some of the care I took was that he comes in the middle of the semester, and and you know what I started thinking about too? This is going to sound really random. 10 Things I Hate About You. The movie 10 Things I Hate About You, and how at the end she has this poem that she's reading, and it's a confession of her feelings, right? And so that's how this starts, right? Like, it's the last day of class, and she's been crushing on this. He's a very young professor, this young professor, and everybody has to read their poem in this poetry class, literature class, and she reads this poem called Brave the Skies, which is the title of the story, of course. And he would be the only one who recognized that it was kind of her, kind of like shooting her shot on the last day of class, because first of all, it's the last day of class. She's about to graduate. She's no longer going to be a teacher. So those are some of the things that I was really careful with. He's actually, and I don't want to give too much away, but he's in a committed relationship. So there's really no possibility for them. So you're really kind of just planting seeds. And then we kind of fast forward to years later when they re-encounter each other on Finley again. So those were some of the things that I was just really careful about, is they were very close in age. It's like the last day of her even being a student when she's confessing it, and just drawing those boundaries. So I wanted to have fun, because sometimes the stuff that I write is kind of heavy. And so I kind of troped it out and started with 10 Things I Hate About You and went from there.
I love that. Also, that scene is hilarious.
Yeah.
So okay, so really quick, I know you have like, you have stuff happening. Anything you want to share? And also, because now I just found out that you're gonna even continue this in your next story. Are we gonna see their relationship a little bit more in your next story?
You know what? I don't think specifically.
Okay.
Finley College is very prominent in its score. I have a book called Real, and this is the second book in this series. It's a different couple than is featured in Real. And it's a second chance romance. And in Real, we don't know what happened. We just know there's a lot of animosity between them, and that they dated in college. And so in Score, a lot of Score actually takes place on Finley. And so we won't see this relationship specifically, but for those who read my books, they'll be like, there's Finley College, that kind of thing. So I love doing that. And I'm really excited about it.
Thank you, Kennedy. Okay, Nicola. So, as I said, I encouraged the collection with different formats, and so you gave us the class syllabus version. And I remember when I got it, I was like, "This is so unique," and I have no idea how to edit this. Like, I'm already a baby editor, but that is what an in-house editor is for. So, shout out to Chelsea Johns for that. And so I want you to talk about how the heck did you come up with all of this? Like where did your gears start turning where you're like, yes, this is how I want to do this story?
I mean, first of all, like editing something like this is it's a pain in the butt. So thanks to you and Chelsea, honestly, for like smart edits. Um, I just love a non-traditional format. Like I love it. And like Liz was saying, like when I do anthologies, it's a chance to like sort of play in a way that you don't necessarily get to in like the longer books. But in all my books, I always have like interstitials or like things that break the form because I just find it interesting. Like I like when you're limited, it makes you be more creative in some ways, right? Like when you like give yourself like those walls, you got to write yourself around it. And so, so in some ways it's great, but in some ways sucks. Like it's just like, how am I going to tell this story? You have to come up with new ways to tell it within that the box you've placed for yourself. And I love a college syllabus, actually. So I read through a lot of them because like you read them and you feel like this class is going to be so great. You're going to come out this other person on the other side. And sometimes that's true. And sometimes the class blows and the professor sucks. And, um, so like I read a lot of them and just sort of tried to get that vibe of who you're going to be at the end of this class. But the real heart of the story is who are Danica and Sterling going to be after they meet each other and after they fall in love. And so Danica, she has the secret. Her mom is very sick. She's from Jamaica. She's going the to the HBCU in the Virgin Islands, and she thinks that she doesn't have long with Sterling. She really likes him, um, and it's fun. But then it becomes more than that. And, love is great, but also life gets hard, right? And so when love really counts is when it gets hard. Like that person who can hold your hand through all the hard stuff. And she doesn't think that she's found that person. She doesn't think he's going to be that person. Um, and part of her challenge is to learn that and to learn to trust and to learn to depend on someone else. So it's called romantic studies because she has to study. She has to figure out how to like let someone in and to be the person that deserves that kind of love and trusts. So yeah, that's it. It was so fun to write, but also kind of a pain. Writing
So
sucks. Everyone thinks that writing's great. Writing's terrible, you guys.
So what I also loved about this is that you showed that they were literally like stumbling through their romance. And it was cool because you talk about the syllabus, but I feel like it was like, as a professor writing it, you were sort of the professor, you know what I mean? The professor of romance, writing like how they should love, like schooling them on how they should love. And so can you talk a little bit about like because you write YA, this sort of stumbling into love because there's so much of that and how, you're coming into adulthood with love and how, there's room for redemption, like while you were trying to write that in the story or how you chose to write that into the story.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if you've heard me talk on a panel, and I am a total romantic goober. Like I love love, like I'm all about it. Like I will talk about it forever, all day. Um, and one of my favorite things about love is that you have to fall in love with yourself too when you're falling in love. Like you have to really get to know yourself. Um, you have to like let your world expand. And that's so like when you find your person, like they make your world bigger, right? It doesn't narrow it down, like it opens it up. Um, and so I love, but you on the way in that journey, you make a lot of mistakes because people make mistakes, right? Um, and you have to just allow a certain amount of grace, right, to fall in love and like to take that leap. But like you have to forgive yourself. You're gonna screw it up. Um, and so I mean, this is just by the by, but like I think in our world in general, there's not enough grace that we allow each other, right? We don't allow each other to mess up all the time, and we think the worst of each other a lot of the times. Like, like just assume like that person said this thing and this means that they mean like the nth degree. And usually people don't. Most people are good, right? Most people, not all people, lots of people terrible, but most people, for the most part, I think most people are good or at least trying to be good. And so like I wanted them to screw up and hurt each other's feelings and have miscommunications and find their way back because that's just how life is actually. Like you screw up with your friends and they forgive you and yeah, that's how love works. That's how it becomes stronger. So I really wanted to put that in there too. And it's not just young adults who like need to know that.
Oh, absolutely. Not at all.
Like, I mean, we all need like I need it all the time. Like I screw up daily. So
Thank you. Okay, and last but not least, we have Christine. So, in a similar way to Elizabeth, we were also breaking bread, and I was talking to you about this anthology, and you actually pitched this idea of a cowboy story that you had been toying with, which immediately I was like, yes, let's go, because I wanted my cowboy story. I wanted a story set in the West. Like, it was all the things that I was into, and I was just like, cowboy story, good, please move forward and do what you want to do. So can you talk about the story that was like living in your head, the research? Because you went to PWI and also your degrees are stacked in ways that you could talk about. But can you talk a little bit about like how all of this sort of created this particular story that you came to think?
Yeah. So I grew up in South Florida. Me and the other authors were having this conversation earlier. And like in a very still segregated, former Black settlement town known as Pleasant City, Florida, which has now been absorbed by West Palm Beach, Florida. And so I wasn't exposed to Black history and culture in literature until I went off to college. And so, where some people were like, oh, yeah, I read The Bluest Eye in eighth grade, like this was me in college being exposed to all this beautiful and wonderful Black literature and history. I took my first AFAM history class and immediately just like changed my major and was like, I'm about to major in Black studies. And everyone was like, what are you going to do with that? This is in the 1900s, y'all, in the late 1900s. Okay. So I graduated high school in 1994. And so there was no Black Lives Matter. There was not this interest. There was no online community, right? And so it was very, it was a very big risk. And, a lot of people, even myself, wondered, what am I going to do with it? But it didn't matter because I was just so in love with finding out so much about my history and my people that had been, I had never had that type of exposure. So I'm always looking for stories of the African diaspora that have never been told. That's like my jam. And there are all these there's so many stories, y'all. We could never run out. I'm always finding some little historical footnote. And I was studying just the history of Black Oklahoma when I found out there were more Black settlement towns there than any other state. I thought that was fascinating because all we hear about is Tulsa. And I came across this historical footnote where there were indigenous tribes in Oklahoma that owned slaves. And I was like, this is fascinating. There were indigenous tribes that fought on the side of the Confederacy. And so when we were having that dinner, all that history was just like fresh in my head. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is my chance to tell this story. As many of the other authors said, though, we had a word count. And I do, when it comes to historical footnotes, I do think there are things that you have to honor. And I do think telling that the indigenous, interconnected history that we have in Oklahoma with Black folks. And it is just, man, it's such a rich history. I really wouldn't have been able to put it into a short story. But what I did find out so much when doing that history was about the history of Black cowboys and cow women in Oklahoma. And man, y'all, it is just fascinating. And of course, many of the Black cowboys that, now we're seeing, where them fans at and all that, right? But historically, they came from Africa. Like there was cattle wrangling and herding in Africa, and these, it was just this beautiful history. And so what I wanted though was to somehow tie that into our modern day story. And I think this is very true for Black history and culture. A lot of the things that we should be proud of, sometimes we find shame in or may want to hide. Remembering Ryan Coogler when he was working on Black Panther, being an African, saying like, seeing all these people eating watermelon and him saying like, man, I would never eat watermelon like that, back home. And the woman he was speaking to said, why? Right? Like this sustained your ancestors. It's rich in nutrients, it holds water, and and just like learning about these little bits of our history that we should take pride in, but whether through society or historically or sometimes even familially, we find shame in some of these narratives. And so for Leo, the main character, I wanted him to be first gen. I'm first gen everything, y'all, like everything. I have a bachelor's in Africana Studies, a master's in African and African American history, and a Juris Doctorate. So I'm also a lawyer. And I just kept pursuing education because it just like opened my mind up. But I do remember, someone said I'm crying over here. I really do remember being first gen, literally having to have my high school math teacher help me fill out my FAFSA. My family didn't. What do you mean? What is this, right? And so I wanted to really share that story through Leo. What is it like being first gen? What is it like being first gen on campus and saying, man, this is an opportunity. Should I act like her? Should I act like him? Should I pretend? Should I do this? Should I do that? And then, you build up this little fake identity, and then you fall in love, and then it's the end of the semester and you got to go home, and home ain't nothing like what you've been telling people it was like, right? And so through the character of Leo, and his name is very important historically, so I'm gonna let that be a little secret, but really wanted to tell excuse me, the history of Black cowboys and ranching, and what a beautiful history it is, and to see him first be ashamed of that story and then take ownership of that story, I think is something that we can all learn from. And so, yeah, that's one little lie.
Thank you. Okay, and then I have one last question. We're gonna answer like one or two audience questions. I'm sorry, y'all. I think y'all enjoyed it though, because I did. But so you have a book coming out tomorrow. So thank you, number one, for actually doing this. Can you talk a little bit, happy publication eve, can you talk a little bit about the book that you have coming out tomorrow?
Yes, and I'm laughing because it's right here on my desk because I've been doing podcasts and interviews all day. It is Less is Liberation, How to Find Freedom from a Life of Overwhelm, y'all. Finding freedom from a life of overwhelm. We are all overwhelmed right now. I do think that stories like the ones in this anthology are so important to managing our overwhelm. I really do think reading, learning, loving all of these things, especially through the lens of our people, is an act of joy and resistance in these types of moments. And so thank you, Ebony, and all my fellow contributors for this anthology. It definitely gave me a lot of joy reading your stories. And so, yeah, that's Less is Liberation is really about how do we let go of limiting beliefs, identities, all of these things that are keeping us from the lives that we want and deserve. And throughout the book are love notes to Black women. If you read the Afro Minimalist Guide, I have For the Culture call outs. And in this book, it's love notes to Black women because no one knows overwhelm like Black women. And I wanted to really speak to us in a loving way so we could start to dismantle some of these things that are keeping us from living, again, the lives that we want to deserve. So thank you.
Of course. Okay, so I'm gonna do two questions and I'm gonna do them together. And one is from the same, it's like whatever. I'm gonna start. The first one is Nikisha. She says, as a young aspiring author, what would be your biggest advice? And then from Nikisha and Rabia, I'm sorry y'all if I'm butchering these. What do you hope readers take away from your story? So you guys can just kind of like throw out there answering any of them, and then we'll wrap things up.
I'll take the advice for young writers question. Um, uh, Writing is hard, right? And it's hard for everyone. It's hard for your favorite authors. The blank page is intimidating for us all. Um, let like uncertainty is part of the process, is the thing I always say. And every time I've written a book, I get to the middle and I bawl my eyes out, and my husband David says, "You're like this every time." And I go, "Okay, but it still sucks right this second." But uncertainty is part of it, right? So you just write through it, cannot fix a blank page, but you can fix a bad first draft. And the first drafts of my books have always been terrible, just dreadful. But the ones that are on the like in the bookstores are pretty good. And it's because I'm tenacious. I will not let it go. I will revise for 100 years. I'll just do it again and again. And that is what you need to know is that you just have to write it and then do it again and again and again until the thing in your head matches the thing on the page. And it's hard for us all, and it's always hard. So it's okay. Like, you can do it. Like, I promise you, like a bum like me can do it. You can do it. You got this. You can do it.
And it's Rabia. Thank you. Okay, continue.
Yeah, that was my advice. It's like the doubt is part of the process. Just get in there and do it.
Okay. And then, I mean, I guess I can answer the question about what I hope the biggest takeaway is. I really want us, I think we're in a time where we're all trying to figure out what the heck to do, how to navigate life in general. And I think what is so beautiful about HBCUs is how Black people were able to form these really beautiful communities, in the way that we have joy, in the way that we advocate, in the way that we resist. There's like so many things happening on a campus that my hope is whether you went to a HBCU, you went to a PWI, that you will take some of these important parts and kind of create like your own little communities, your own little HBCUs around you. Like think of the things that makes HBCUs great and find that locally, find that around with the people around you because we're gonna absolutely need it. So is there anybody else who wants to say anything before I wrap things up about any of the questions that we got? No? Okay, well, thank you all so, so much. Thank you. I really need to say this. Everybody who's on here, they bought a copy of the book as well. So we really, really appreciate your support. It means everything to us. We hope you enjoy it. Thank you all for coming. Carmen said, HU, you know, so I got to sign off like that, obviously, because I went to Howard. So, but thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And have a good
Thank you.
evening.
Yeah, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.